Have you ever wondered what bizarre jobs your grandparents might have had or witnessed? Well, prepare to be amazed, because Britain's past was filled with professions so strange they sound completely made up. But these weren't just odd little side hustles. These were legitimate careers that thousands relied on. From human alarm clocks to the ladies who guarded public toilets like Fort Knox, these jobs reveal how dramatically our society has transformed in just a few generations. So join me as we explore 21 forgotten British careers that will make you appreciate your modern job. Before affordable alarm clocks existed, the knocker-upper was essential to industrial Britain. These human alarm clocks made rounds through working-class neighbourhoods, particularly in northern England, armed with long sticks or pea shooters. Every morning before dawn, they'd wake clients by tapping on bedroom windows or shooting dried peas until they got a response. Imagine being startled awake not by your iPhone, but by a stranger shooting peas at your window. Clients paid a few pence weekly for this service, crucial for factory workers who risked losing jobs if late. The most skilled knocker-uppers kept detailed mental records of which windows to tap and when. But who woke up the knocker-upper? Many were night watchmen finishing night shifts. Others were simply early risers who monetized their inability to sleep in. The profession survived into the 1950s, gradually fading as affordable alarm clocks became household staples. If you remember knocker-uppers or have family stories about them, share them in the comments below. Rag and bone. Any old iron. This familiar cry echoed through residential streets from the 1950s through the 1970s, announcing Britain's original recyclers. The rag and bone man travelled neighbourhoods with a horse and cart, collecting unwanted household items, old clothes, scrap metal, furniture, and anything else people didn't want. What made this profession unique was the barter system. Rather than paying cash, they might offer a goldfish in a plastic bag, a balloon, or a few pennies for your unwanted goods. It was recycling with carnival flair. Children would rummage through cupboards for items to trade, excited at the prospect of receiving a small toy in return. These colourful characters knew their regular customers by name and often shared neighbourhood gossip. By the 1970s, as consumer culture took hold and municipal waste collection improved, these sustainable entrepreneurs began disappearing from British streets. Before automation revolutionised bowling alleys, pin setting was perhaps one of the most dangerous yet oddly entertaining jobs a young person could have in 1950s Britain. Perched on narrow ledges above the pins, these brave teenagers would jump down after each roll, quickly clear fallen pins, and reset them in perfect formation, all before scrambling back to safety before the next ball came hurtling toward them. Pin setters needed lightning-fast reflexes and a casual relationship with personal safety. For their troubles, they earned a few pennies per game, making it popular among schoolboys looking for pocket money. Regular bowlers often developed relationships with their pin setters, sometimes tipping them for especially quick service. The job was hot, noisy, and occasionally resulted in bruised shins if timing went awry. By the early 1960s, the Brunswick automatic pin setter began appearing in upscale British bowling alleys. The last human pin setters in Britain were mostly gone by 1963. Before central heating became standard, the coal delivery man was vital to keeping British homes warm until the 1970s. These men were the unsung heroes of winter, delivering heavy sacks of coal in all weather conditions. A typical coalman would haul 50-kilogram sacks on his back, navigating narrow alleyways, steep garden paths, and tight coal cellar doors. The job required immense physical strength. A single delivery round might involve moving several tons of coal by hand. Coalmen developed distinctive physical characteristics: broad shoulders, powerful arms, and a permanent coating of coal dust that seemed embedded in their skin. With a practice flick, they'd deposit coal into customers' bunkers with minimal spillage. Many developed coal tattoos, where dust became permanently embedded in cuts and scrapes. As gas and electric heating became common through the 1960s and 70s, demand for coal deliveries declined, dealt a final blow by the Clean Air Acts. Hit that like button if your family home ever had coal deliveries or a coal bunker. The gentle clink of glass bottles at daybreak was once the soundtrack to British mornings, thanks to the milkman, a profession that's now nearly extinct but was once essential. Every morning, rain or shine, the milkman would make his rounds before most people were awake, delivering fresh milk in distinctive glass bottles. What made the milkman special wasn't just the dairy products, it was his role as a community fixture. Many milkmen served the same routes for decades, knowing their customers by name. Homes would leave out empty bottles with money tucked under them, sometimes with notes requesting extra items. The milkman would make the exchange while most residents slept. Milkmen were also unofficial neighbourhood watchdogs, often the first to notice if elderly residents hadn't collected previous deliveries or if something seemed amiss. The decline began in the 1970s as supermarkets offered cheaper milk and refrigerators became standard. By the 1990s, home delivery had become a luxury rather than a necessity. Number, please. These words, spoken by predominantly female voices, connected Britain for decades before automated systems took over. Seated before massive switchboards with countless cables and plugs, telephone exchange operators, mostly women, manually connected every phone call made in Britain. When you picked up your telephone, an operator would answer, ask what number you wanted, and physically connect your line to the recipients using cables and plugs. The job required remarkable dexterity, memory, and patience. Operators memorized hundreds of numbers, worked at lightning speed, and maintained perfect telephone etiquette, even with rude callers. Exchange operators were privy to the most intimate details of community life. This led to a strict code of confidentiality. The best operators were known for their discretion. The profession was almost exclusively female, with strict requirements. Women had to be single. They were expected to resign upon marriage until the 1960s, well-spoken, and have arms long enough to reach across the switchboard. The profession began declining in the 1960s as automated exchanges were introduced. Before self-cleaning toilets, public conveniences across Britain were guarded by a special breed of gatekeeper, the public convenience attendant, often known as the toilet lady or loo warden. These formidable individuals, typically older women with no-nonsense attitudes, maintained public toilets with military precision. Armed with mops, disinfectant, and an eagle eye for troublemakers, they ensured these facilities remained clean and respectable. For the privilege of using these facilities, visitors would pay a small fee, initially a penny, hence the phrase spending a penny. Later 2 pence, and eventually 5 pence, as inflation took its toll on the toilet economy. Many attendants expanded their role, creating mini-empires within their tiled domains. They might sell emergency toiletries, dispense hand towels, or run small tuck shops offering sweets and cigarettes. The profession began declining in the 1980s as local councils cut costs and introduced automated payment systems. Going up. These words once greeted shoppers in department stores across Britain. The lift attendant was more than just a button pusher. They were part tour guide, part security guard, and part ambassador. Dressed in smart uniforms that often included white gloves and pillbox hats, lift attendants operated the manual controls of early elevators, ensuring smooth journeys between floors. They announced each level with rehearsed descriptions: second floor, ladies' fashions, millinery, and accessories. Early lifts needed to be stopped precisely level with each floor. Too high or too low could result in dangerous trips. Attendants developed an almost supernatural sense of exactly when to pull the lever to achieve a perfect landing. Beyond technical skills, the role demanded impeccable social graces. Attendants were expected to make polite conversation, remember regular customers, and maintain decorum in what was essentially a small moving room. The profession began declining in the 1960s as automated lifts became more common. Any more fares, please? This familiar call once rang through double-decker buses across Britain, issued by one of the most quintessentially British professions, the bus conductor. Armed with a ticket machine strapped to their chest, a leather change pouch, and often a whistle, conductors were the multitasking masters of public transport. They collected fares, issued tickets, announced stops, helped passengers on and off, and kept order among rowdy schoolchildren. The conductor's ticket machine was a mechanical marvel, a heavy metal device with various dials to adjust for different fare zones. With practiced fingers, they could calculate fares, make change, and print tickets in seconds, all while maintaining balance on a moving vehicle. Communication between driver and conductor was an art form. 2 rings on the bell meant move on, 1 meant stop. The profession began declining in the 1970s as one-person-operated buses became more common. Subscribe now for more nostalgic British history videos and ring that notification bell. Long before digital news, the paperboy, or occasionally papergirl, was a fixture of British mornings from the 1950s through the 1990s. Rising before dawn, these young entrepreneurs would collect their allocated newspapers from the local newsagent, carefully fold them for throwing, and set off on their bicycles in all weather conditions. Rain, snow, or shine. The papers had to be delivered. For many British teenagers, a paper round was their first taste of employment and responsibility. The job taught punctuality, route planning, and customer service. All for a few pounds a week plus Christmas tips if you were lucky. The typical paperboy carried a heavy canvas bag slung across their shoulder, often containing dozens of newspapers. The weight could be substantial, especially on Sundays when papers were thick with supplements. Paperboys developed intimate knowledge of their neighbourhoods. Which houses had dogs to avoid, which customers wanted their paper in a specific spot, and which gardens had treacherous paths in icy weather. While telephone exchange operators connected the general public, large businesses, hotels and department stores had their own internal communications experts, the switchboard girls. Seated at the reception desk or in a dedicated room, these young women operated smaller versions of the telephone exchange, directing calls to various departments and offices within the building. They were often the first point of contact for customers or clients, making their telephone manner crucial to the business's reputation. The job required exceptional memory and organisational skills. Switchboard girls memorised dozens or even hundreds of extension numbers, knew which executives were in or out of the office, and developed tactful ways to screen unwanted calls. In hotels, they might also serve as an information service, connecting guests to local businesses or attractions. In department stores, they would direct customer inquiries to the appropriate department, sometimes even checking stock availability before transferring calls. The profession began declining in the 1970s as electronic switchboards with direct dialing capabilities became more common. In an era when televisions were expensive luxury items, many British families rented rather than purchased their sets from companies like Radio Rentals, DER, or Rumbelows. When these precious entertainment boxes inevitably broke down, the TV rental repairman became the most welcome visitor imaginable. These technical wizards would arrive in branded vans carrying toolboxes and spare parts to diagnose and fix television problems on the spot. They were part engineer, part magician in the eyes of families desperate to restore their main source of entertainment. Early televisions were complex, temperamental devices filled with vacuum tubes and components that regularly failed. Repairmen needed extensive technical knowledge and diagnostic skills to identify problems quickly. The relationship between families and their TV repairmen was often warm and personal. Regular visits for adjustments or repairs meant they became familiar faces, often greeted with cups of tea and biscuits as they worked their electronic magic. The profession began declining in the 1980s as televisions became more reliable and cheaper to purchase outright. Before personal computers transformed office work, large businesses relied on typist pools, rooms filled with young women operating typewriters to handle all written communication. These typing specialists would take dictation from executives or work from handwritten drafts, transforming them into perfectly formatted letters, reports, and documents. The clickety-clack of dozens of typewriters working simultaneously created a distinctive soundtrack to office life from the 1950s through the 1980s. The job required exceptional accuracy and speed. Professional typists could maintain 60 to 100 words per minute with minimal errors. Mistakes were costly. With no delete key or spell check, a single error often meant retyping an entire page. Typist pools operated with strict hierarchies and rules. Junior typists handled routine correspondence, while seniors took on confidential or complex documents. Supervisors monitored productivity and quality, sometimes timing workers with stopwatches. The profession began declining in the 1980s as word processors and then personal computers appeared on office desks. Before you could preview music online, record stores like HMV and Our Price offered a magical service: private listening booths where customers could hear records before buying them. The listening booth assistant was the gatekeeper to this musical experience. They would take your selected record, carefully remove it from its sleeve, and play it on a turntable connected to headphones in small, often soundproofed booths. The job required extensive music knowledge, careful handling of vinyl records, and diplomatic skills to deal with customers who might spend hours listening without purchasing. Assistants developed an encyclopedic familiarity with current releases and back catalogues. These musical guides wielded considerable influence over local taste. Their recommendations could make or break new artists in their area, and regular customers often relied on their judgment when exploring new genres or artists. The profession began declining in the 1970s as cassette tapes, which were harder to damage, replaced vinyl as the dominant format. In offices and factories across Britain from the 1950s to the 1980s, one of the most welcome sounds was the approaching rattle of the tea trolley, pushed by that beloved institution, the tea lady. Armed with an urn of hot water, teapots, cups, saucers, and often biscuits or cakes, tea ladies would make scheduled rounds through workplaces, serving refreshments to grateful workers. The arrival of the tea trolley marked a brief but important break in the workday. A moment of respite and socialization. Tea ladies were far more than beverage dispensers. They were confidants, gossip conduits, and unofficial morale officers. They knew how each person took their tea, a surprisingly personal detail in British culture, and often remembered important dates or events in workers' lives. In many workplaces, tea ladies developed their own territories and routines, becoming as much a part of the company structure as any department. The profession began declining in the 1980s as cost-cutting measures led companies to install vending machines or kitchenettes. Don't forget to share this video with someone who remembers these vanished British professions. In the smoky atmosphere of 1950s and 60s British nightclubs, pubs and theatres, cigarette girls added a touch of glamour to the already heady environment. Dressed in smart, often revealing uniforms, these young women circulated through venues carrying trays of cigarettes, cigars and sometimes sweets or small gifts. With a strap around their necks supporting their display cases, they would weave between tables, offering their wares with practiced charm. The job combined sales skills with entertainment. Cigarette girls were expected to be attractive, personable, and able to handle unwanted advances with good humour. They memorised brands, prices, and regular customers' preferences, often working for commission on their sales. The profession began declining in the late 1960s as attitudes towards smoking began to change, and self-service cigarette machines became more common. By the 1970s, cigarette girls had largely disappeared from British venues. Behind the scenes of every cinema from the 1950s through the 1980s worked skilled technicians whose craft was invisible to audiences but essential to the movie-going experience. The film splicers and rewinders. These projection room wizards were responsible for preparing films for screening and maintaining them during their run at the cinema. Films arrived as multiple reels that needed to be spliced together for continuous projection and then carefully rewound after each showing. The job required meticulous attention to detail and steady hands. Using specialized equipment, splicers would join film sections with perfect alignment. Any mistake would be glaringly obvious on screen. They repaired tears or breaks, removed damaged sections, and ensured smooth transitions between reels. Cinema rewinders worked against the clock between screenings, carefully returning thousands of feet of film to its original reels, checking for damage as the film passed through their fingers at high speed. The profession began declining in the 1980s as automated projection systems became more common. Before automated jingles became standard, some ice cream vans in 1950s through 1980s, Britain employed a dedicated person whose sole job was to create the distinctive musical announcement of the van's arrival. These chimes operators used various methods to produce the memorable melodies that sent children running with pocket money. Some played actual handheld bells in specific patterns. Others operated mechanical music boxes, and some even sang or played instruments through microphones connected to roof-mounted speakers. The job required perfect timing and knowledge of neighbourhoods. Chimes operators would start their musical announcements at strategic moments to maximise impact, knowing exactly which streets had the most children and when they were likely to be playing outside. In some cases, the chimes operator and driver were a team, with the operator also helping serve ice cream during busy periods. They developed their own signature tunes that made their van instantly recognisable. The profession began declining in the 1970s as pre-recorded electronic chimes became standard equipment on ice cream vans. While most people associate chimney sweeps with Victorian London, this sooty profession remained an active and essential trade well into the mid to late 20th century, especially in areas where coal fires were still common. Chimney sweeps of the 1950s through 1970s were a far cry from their climbing boy predecessors. They used long-handled brushes, vacuum equipment, and professional techniques rather than sending small children up the flues. Nevertheless, the job remained dirty, physically demanding, and essential to home safety. Regular chimney cleaning prevented the dangerous buildup of creosote and soot that could cause chimney fires or deadly carbon monoxide poisoning. Sweeps developed intimate knowledge of different chimney constructions and how to clean them effectively. Many sweeps still observed traditions like wearing top hats and considered it lucky for a bride to see a sweep on her wedding day. Some would offer sooty handshakes to newlyweds for good fortune. The Clean Air Acts of 1956 and 1968 began the profession's decline as gas and electric heating replaced coal fires. Though largely extinct by the mid-20th century, the lamplighter continued to work in some historic areas of Britain into the 1930s, representing one of the most iconic Victorian professions to survive into the modern era. Armed with a long pole or ladder, lamplighters would make their rounds at dusk, manually lighting gas street lamps that illuminated Britain's streets. Each morning they would return to extinguish the flames, creating a daily rhythm that residents could set their watches by. The job required physical stamina to cover long routes quickly, knowledge of each lamp's peculiarities, and the ability to work in all weather conditions. Lamplighters carried their distinctive poles with hooks or small flames at the end, using them to reach the gas valves on tall lampposts. Beyond simply lighting lamps, these workers were responsible for cleaning glass lanterns, adjusting gas flow, and performing basic maintenance. They became familiar neighbourhood figures, often greeting late-night revellers or early morning workers on their rounds. The profession began its final decline in the early 20th century, as electric street lighting spread across Britain. These 21 forgotten British jobs reveal how dramatically our daily lives have changed in just a few generations. While technology has eliminated these professions, something intangible has been lost: the personal connections they created in communities. If you enjoyed this nostalgic journey, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below.